When you're ready, Bobby.
Okay. This dreadful dark and dismal day has swept my glories all away. My sun goes down, my days are past, and I must leave this world at last. O Lord, what will become of me? I am condemned, you all now see. To heaven or hell my soul must fly, all in one moment when I die. For on a dark and dreary night I put his body out of sight, to see his soul and body part. It strikes with terror to my heart. The jealous thought that first gave strife to make me take my husband's life. For days and months I spent my time thinking how to commit this crime. And on a dark and doleful night I put his body out of sight. With flames I tried to him consume, but time would not admit it done. His chattering tongues fell gently down, his pitiful voice soon lost its sound. All ye that are of Adam's race, let not my faults this child disgrace. Judge Daniels has my sentence passed. These prison walls I leave at last. Nothing to cheer my drooping head until I'm numbered with the dead. Great God, how shall I be forgiven? Not fit for earth, not fit for heaven, but little time to pray to God. For now I try that awful road. One of the strangest and most frightening stories to me in my lifetime that I remember happened over in western North Carolina in the Toe River country. That's where my mother was raised and her people. My folks came into that country back in the early 1800s, long about 1800 or 1 or 2. And they settled in there. And in those days it was like a wild wilderness, you might say. The woods was full of painters and bears. And of course there was mink and beaver. And one of the children of the Silvers family that moved into the Mitchell and Yancey County sections of Toe River was a trapper. And his name was Charles Silvers. He was my third cousin. My grandfather, or my great-great-grandfather, was his first cousin. And so it's been, of course, generations ago. And it happened, the story that I'm about to tell happened in the early 1830s, long about 1831, I believe. But the country was still fairly new. And Charles Silvers was the oldest son of preacher Jacob Silver. And Uncle Jake Silver, he was the son of old man George that had come down from Pennsylvania and Maryland back after the Revolutionary War. And the children had helped build a big cabin over there, and the cabin's still standing and in use by the family. But Charles was Jacob Silver's son by his first wife, Lizzie Wilson. She took sick and had trouble in giving him birth and died just soon after he was born. And Charlie was raised by Uncle Jake Silvers and his second wife, whose name was Nancy Reed. And Nancy raised about 8 or 10 youngins by preacher Jake. But she raised Charlie too. He was the oldest, and as Charles grew up, he took to the woods, and he was a hunter and a trapper. and he would go out in the woods and get beaver and mink, and a big party of men sometimes would go and stay gone for months up back toward or weeks rather, back on the boundary, on the frontier then, I guess, of North Carolina and Tennessee. And Charles, when he was about 18, he married a girl that's family had come into the Toe River section named Stewart. And her name was Frances Stewart, but the mountain people would call a girl named Frances Frankie. And Frankie, they said, was a girl that had charms. They said that she was a very pretty girl and a good dancer. And her folks, though, were real poor people. They didn't have much. They lived in a little shack of a cabin about a mile down the river below the Silvers. But Charlie married Frankie, and they built up a little pole cabin across the ridge behind the mountain where Charles's brothers and sisters and father and stepmother lived. And it was just a little one-room cabin that sat over there in the holler. And they set up housekeeping there, and about a year later, a baby come along, and he named the baby Nancy after his stepmother that he thought a lot of. Well, it was long about Christmas time. They said that Charlie was preparing to go on a hunting trip with some friends back up on the Tennessee line, and was going to be gone for about a week. And it was a cold time of year, and the snow was just a-pouring down. They said that it just poured the snow all day long, and Charlie cut down an old sourwood tree. Said he chopped it up, and said that after he split it and he piled it up for wood that would do Frankie and the baby while he was gone a-trapping. And when he come in that evening, they said that he sat down at the table and they ate. Well, according to my granny's uncle, her father was there too and ate supper with him. And when he got done, Charles said that, "I'm beat," said, "I think I'll lay down." And Frankie looked at him and said, "Well, I fixed a pallet for you by the fireplace," said, "I thought you might want to take a nap till you got ready to go to bed." Well, I've wondered for years and years why in the world anybody would want to take a nap till they got ready to go to bed. And I can't figure it out, but that's the words that they claim that he said. So she had a sheepskin rug and had it laying there in front of the fireplace, and Charlie, he just laid down on the rug with the little baby Nancy. It was just old enough to start walking. He went to sleep. Well, after he seemed to be sound asleep, Frankie's daddy looked at her and said, "Now's your time, Frankie, now's your time." And so they went outside, and Charles had sharpened his axe, and he come back in. And she stood over him, and she'd rear back of their axe and start to come down on him. And he's laying there, and he'd smile at her in his sleep. And said she'd come back again, and he'd smile at her again. About the third time, he'd grin at her every time. The third time, she finally said, "Well, I can't do it. I can't kill him. He's smiling at me like that." And Frankie's father said, "Well, now, if you don't kill him," said, "I'll kill you." Said, "If you don't kill him, I'll kill you." So finally, she come back, and she come down on him and give him one lick to the side of the head. And they claimed that she dropped the axe in. He jumped up and screamed, "God bless the child." Well, she run over there and jumped into bed and got under the covers and hid there till she heard him hit the floor. And said that her daddy took the axe when he fell. Said he took the axe and come back, and he used such force to cut his head off that he split his head at the neck, and said his head bounced again the rafters. And so the blood was just going everywhere. And said that when he fell, or after he cut his head off, he chopped him all to pieces right there where he laid. I guess it probably scared him a little bit too. And they said that the baby, Nancy, got to crawling, and said that it crawled through its dad's own blood, and where it was learning to walk, it tried to stand up at the table, and it put its little handprints on the table, and said that the mark was left there forever. Well, anyway, they burned him all night long in that fireplace with that wood that he had meant to keep Frankie and the baby warm while he was gone. And of course, naturally, all the parts of the body won't burn. It would take an awfully high heat to just about cremate anybody anyhow. So they took the parts that wouldn't burn, his guts and his lungs, I guess, and the parts that and liver maybe, and put them in a sack. And she took his head, or her father did one, and they said they went and hid it in a holler stump off out on the edge of the yard. And it was still just snowing and snowing. And so her daddy now, and the reports over the years always said now that Frankie done this because she was the one that got into trouble for it, but now this is the way they told it at home. Said that her daddy put on his boots and took his lights that was in the sack and went down the holler toward the river. It's about, not quite a half a mile, but right at it. And there's a little trail that went by a branch. And about halfway down the trail toward the river, there was a shelving rock that stuck out, a little stick-out point, and some rocks there around under it. And they claimed that he hid that sack of lights underneath that one of those rocks there. And that he marched on to the river, and he got down there, and when he got there, he found that the river was completely froze over. It was just, right at Christmas and a cold time. And so he took a big log that he found close by, and he jobbed big holes in the ice. That way people would think that maybe Charlie had gotten drowned, had fallen through on his way across the river maybe. So then he backtracked it home, and when he got back, they tried their best, I guess, to clean it up. But anyway, the next morning, little later daylight, Charlie's stepmother and his sisters was washing over across the mountain at their house outside. It was a real cold day and had a big old wash pot and everything. And they said that Aunt Nancy, that was Charlie's stepmammy, she saw Frankie coming across the hill with a baby. Said she come down there. Frankie said to her mother-in-law, said, well, yuns is hard at it early, ain't you? And she said, yeah, we're just getting ready for a rest at the holiday. We was trying to clean up. And said, what have you done this morning? She said, she'd been hard at it, a washing and a cleaning, but she didn't tell what she'd been cleaning. And so they said, well, where's Charlie at? And she said, well, he went to get some feed for the cow across the river, the man's that lived not too far away. She said he ought to be back the next day. Said he thought he might stay all night. And she was going to go and see her mother and dad and stay with them that night, and wanted to know if some of the boys would care to feed the cow that evening. And she said, well, she'd send some of them down there. Well, they remarked that when they went to feed that evening, the only tracks they saw leading to the barn was Frankie's. But anyway, the next day, sometime up in the evening, afternoon, Frankie come down to old man Jake's house and said, well, Charlie ain't got back yet, and said, I just don't care if he don't come back. She said, he didn't show up last night apparently, and he ain't been there all day. Said, I'm just going back to Dad's and stay there. And so she acted real mad like, and Charlie's daddy was getting pretty concerned about it then, so he put out word that Charlie was missing. And they got folks from all over the mountains to go to searching, and they hunted and looked and covered every track of ground, in 10 miles, I guess. They couldn't find a trace of him. They just didn't know what had happened. And so after a few days, old Uncle Jake Silvers, he started panicking, and he'd heard tell that there was a man over near Mountain City, Tennessee, up above Stony Creek, I guess, that had a slave who possessed what they called a conjure ball. It hung by a hair, and you could ask it questions, and it'd give you some kind of answer. And he thought if they couldn't locate Charlie by any other means, maybe the conjure ball could tell him where he was at. So he took some of the boys and made the trip over there. It was probably about a 2-day trip because it was long about 40 miles across the mountains. And when they got there, said the old man, he told the old man that owned the slave what they wanted and why they were there. And he said, well, he's gone off working somewhere today and won't be back. But said the conjure ball, sure, and said, I think I can probably work it for you. And so he went and got it out, and they started asking it questions, and used the ball itself would be like the house. And they'd say, well, what happened? Which way did so-and-so go? Well, he'd just turn around and around, wouldn't move. and they couldn't seem to get any clear-cut answer out of it, and put it up. And so just as old Uncle Jake was fixing to leave, the man come out and said, "Well, now I've been thinking," he said, "do you reckon if your son could have been murdered and done away with at the house?" And said Jake looked at him and said, "Well," said, "his wife's not a big enough woman to take care of that kind of deed." Said, "I don't know, but I guess anything could happen." Well, before they got home, something had happened. They said that one of Charlie's buddies that would go with him a trapping was a man named Jake Collis, and said that he was pretty good friends with him and knew him fairly well. And he got kind of suspicious about what was going on, because one day as he was walking over to old man Silver's house, said that he noticed that Charlie's dog that always went with him everywhere he went would run up to the house and bark at it. And said it would just howl and bark and just go on. And said then it would run down the trail out of sight, and he didn't know where it went. Well, he knew that Frankie was there then, but he kind of watched around the place till he seen her leave, and as soon as she got out of sight, he went down there and investigated a little bit, and she had boarded up the doors. So he went over to old Uncle Jake Silver's and told him that he was just suspicious. Or no, he didn't tell Uncle Jake he was gone. He told some of the boys that was there about being suspicious what was going on, and they got a magistrate that lived there in the area, and 2 or 3 of them went back to the house, and they pulled the boards off, and they went in. And said when they went in there, said everything looked like it had been disturbed. Said it was pretty nice and neat in one way, but said they got over at the far places and said that the ashes looked awful greasy. And they took some and poured water on them, and they went to making blubbers. And said that they got to looking, it looked like little chip marks on the wall. And they had punching floors back in them days, floors that had hooks. The planks had hooks on the end of them. And they raised that up and said there was blood stains in the dirt down underneath and chips of bone. And so they got to investigating further and went out, and that dog had come back, and he had to go from place to place, and everywhere he'd go they'd find little something to remind him of Charlie. Found his head in that old holler stump. And the reason it was going down the trail out of sight, it would go down there to that old stick-out rock where his lights was buried and carry on. So they took his remains up and buried them. Some people said they buried them a little bit at a time instead of taking back up what they'd already buried, that they put him in 3 different graves. Now, I don't know where that's the truth or not. I do know that the one gravestone that they used to have to mark him is gone now, or the wind, else the winds and the rain has taken the name and dates off of it. But anyway, they arrested Frankie and her mother, whose name was Barbary Stewart, and her brother Blackston Stewart. And they held them till they could investigate a little bit, and they finally brought it before the county prosecutor, and they filed a charge of murder against Frankie. Now that took place there over in Morganton, which is about 50 miles away east of the Blue Ridge. But in those days the counties were much bigger than they are now. And so they took them all to jail, but they only kept her mother and brother for a short time, and I don't know if there was just lack of evidence or what. But anyway, the murder charge stuck for Frankie. And my great-great-great-grandfather, he was a witness at the trial, and some of the other members of the family. It was a huge family anyway. Charlie not only had 8 or 10 brothers and sisters, his father had 8 or 10 brothers and sisters, and they about all lived in that country by then. And so they put her in jail, and they had a trial. Well, for some reason, I don't know why, she kept pleading innocent and demanded proof. And they thought it strange that, they figured that even if she hadn't killed him, that she must have known what was going on. It would just about be impossible that she wouldn't have, but that was her case. And so finally, since she wouldn't give any indication that anybody else helped in the murder, they found her guilty on that evidence alone. And so they sentenced her to be hung. Well, some time had passed, and of course they had appealed the case and was hoping for a stay of execution, but it didn't come for a while. But they did postpone the day of her hanging a couple of times. And in the meantime, her father bribed the jailer at the jailhouse there in Morganton to conveniently forget to lock the cell door. And so they spirited her out one night. And they got her out of town, and when they did, they cut her hair off short like a man's. And that was a wonderful disguise in those days, because women just didn't cut their hair then. It was thought to be just awful sinful for a woman to have her hair cut. So they cut her hair and give her an old felt hat to wear and dressed her up in men's clothing. And so they got her out of town, and they was going down the country towards South Carolina. And it was a day or two later, and the sheriff, for some reason, thought that, I don't know if he had a tip or what, but he was awful looking in that direction, had him a posse. And they come across this great big open field, and over on the other side there was a party of people over there throwing the ball at each other. And they said this one man kept catching it awful strange. He'd miss the ball because somebody would throw it to him, and he'd sort of bend over and raise his hands up, and then the ball would hit the ground. And he got to thinking now that at that day and time women had aprons, and they would catch each side of the apron and catch a ball in the folds of it. So by the time that the sheriff and his men got across the field, those people over there had packed up and started on off and moving along, and that feller that he saw was walking alongside the hay wagon, and it was Frankie's uncle driving the hay wagon. And the sheriff rode up alongside where they was walking, and he looked down at Frankie and he said, "Frankie," said, "where you going?" Frankie looked around at him, tried to put on a voice and said, "Well, thank you, sir, my name's Tom." Her uncle was up there in the wagon. He was trying to be real helpful, and he looked around and said, "Yes, sir, her name is Tom. Her name is Tom." So the sheriff said, "Well, come on, Frankie, we got you now." And so they took her back to jail. And I don't know just how much time it was after that before the day of the hanging, but it finally got there. And they said there were people come from miles and miles around to see Frankie Silvers get hung. And they even had a ballot printed. Now, the folklore goes that Frankie composed this ballad and sung it on the scaffold. And there's a lot of old-timers over around Wilkes and Caldwell and Burke County and up in the mountains around Mitchell and Yancey that sing that song and claim that Frankie wrote it and sung it before she died. Now, whether she did or not, I don't know, but it is thought that the ballad was printed. I always figured that probably her dad had it printed up and was trying to make money off of it because of greed. And that's probably what caused the murder anyway. But she was waiting there behind the scaffold, and when the sheriff went to lead her up, they asked her if she had any requests, and she said yes, she wanted a piece of cake. And so they said, "Well, we can do that for you, Frankie." And they had cake brought to her, and she ate her a piece of cake and went up on the scaffold. And they said, "Frankie, have you got anything you'd like to say?" And she said, "Well, yes, I do." And he said, "Well, we'd like for you to tell it." She went to open her mouth, and just as she did, that crowd was all assembled down there in front, and her dad and mother were standing down there. And he said that her daddy hollered out, "Die with it in you, Frankie, die with it in you." And she closed her mouth and never said another word. Well, they put the cap over her face, as far as I know, and they hung her. And after they took her body down, they was afraid that on account of in that day and time, there were a lot of universities had medical schools, and people were trying to find out the causes of diseases, and they would often dissect bodies, and that was the time when the grave robbing was going on. And they was afraid that since it was unheard of for a woman to be executed, that her grave would be likely to get robbed. So they had several graves dug about that same day around about, so people would think that was where Frankie was going to be buried. Well, they covered her body up and put it under a load of sacks in that hay wagon. And they started back toward the mountains, and that night they stayed at a tavern, which is up near the head of Lake James in McDowell County, I guess now. It's probably Burt back then. And they stayed all night, and the next day they decided that it was July, and they found out right quick that it was going to be hard to get the body back without an awful lot of discomfort to them because of the body decomposing. So they dug a grave, they claim, up near the head of Lake James and buried Frankie in it. Now, there's some people that claim that she wasn't buried there, that they actually got to the head of the Blue Ridge near Gillespie Gap, which is near North Carolina Highway 226, and buried her up there. So the truth, probably won't ever be known for sure about that. But they got on back home, and they claim that the family was cursed after that. They said that the old man was killed later on while he was trying to split a rail tree, and a limb fell, knocked his brains out. And they said that eventually old Lady Barbara Stewart got bit by a copperhead, and she's an old woman, died of the complications. And Blackston Stewart apparently moved off to Kentucky, and he got caught house thieving, and they hung him. So that's the way people tend to think of getting paid back in communities like that. As I began to look back and find out a little bit about that family, I found that that may have all happened, but it didn't happen real soon and all at once. It was scattered out over maybe 30 years. But Frankie's grandmother Stewart was supposed to have gotten, Frankie's mother, Barbara Stewart, was supposed to have gotten the granddaughter Nancy and raised her until she was 18, at which time she would give her a suit of clothes and a cow or something. But according to the 1850 census, Nancy was staying with her grandfather Silvers. I don't think they kept her very long. They was probably under threat of death anyway by the family. But a few never got started. I think the Stewarts sort of broke up, and there's still some Stewarts up in that part of the country. But after they had buried Charles up there in the graveyard, they just left his remains there, and the memory of him has sort of faded with time because after about 60 or 70 years, there were some other stories that took place out in the Midwest about a woman named Frankie Baker who shot and killed her husband, and a song grew up called Frankie Baker or Frankie and Albert. And then in the early 1900s, the Frankie and Johnny song came about. And so people's memory tend to confuse things, and now they say that Frankie and Johnny got started with Frankie Silvers. But they still are a few people left that remember the old ballad that Frankie allegedly sang. And her descendants still live in that country, and they've spread out. I found a granddaughter or a great-granddaughter of Frankie Silvers that lived in Jackson County who made hominy, and she was down at the Eno River Festival in Durham, North Carolina about 15 years ago, and she heard me tell the story of Frankie Silvers and came and talked to me about it and said that her mother, or her grandmother, was a sister to a woman that married my grandmother's uncle, and both of them were daughters of Nancy Silvers, who was Frankie and Charlie's daughter. And so the family did spread on through the years, and through intermarriage, you'll find that people are more or less kin of each other in a community like that, and by now they have spread out. But when I was growing up, the house that my mother grew up in sat on a hill just above the mouth of the branch where Charlie was supposed to have fell through the ice. And we didn't have any inside bathroom facilities. We had an old privy outside on the side of the mountain in the woods. And at night, until you went to bed, you had to go out of doors. And so as a child, I didn't like to do that very well because the dirt road that come just up above our house was in plain sight, and I was always afraid that I would see Frankie's spirit come wandering around the road with an axe in her hand and blood in her eyes. And so I was real careful about how often I had to step outside until bedtime in those days. But I could, especially at night in the summertime when you could hear the katydids chattering, think about that story. I don't know why, since it took place in the winter, but but years have rolled on, and nobody, I guess, really knows for sure whether it was Frankie or her father that killed him. But his Charles' nephew, old man Will Silvers, he died about 35 years ago, and he used to tell my grandfather that, in his opinion, the reason that Charles Silvers died was because her father, Frankie's father, and family wanted to move west. And back in those days, even people moving around had to have some source of exchange, money or barter or something, in order to do a lot of traveling. And so they needed him to sell his farm in order to raise funds for, I guess, the wagons that they would need to go west on. And Charlie didn't want to do it. He wanted to stay there, I guess, and raise his family near his own people. And at that time, the hunting was great through there. And so it's said that that was the real reason that Charlie died, that they just coerced Frankie into it, that, you know, she probably was a product of her times and was under the, you know, the bondage to her own family and still had that divided loyalty. And if she did have a hand in killing him, she was probably coerced into it. And there was the other people, and maybe the Stewarts or some of their descendants or friends that put out the word that Charlie was mean to Frankie and that he was in a fit of passion and about to kill her when she struck him with axe. I've always felt like if that were the case, that it looks like Frankie could have claimed self-defense, and even if she had been found guilty, she might have built time in prison rather than being hanged. So it's all been washed away like the waters of Toe River, I guess, and we'll never know for sure. But I've always felt like the most sensible thing was the fact that her people wanted to leave. But it left a story that spread around in the western part of North Carolina for about 170 years. And of course, as in all tales, they get changed a little. Down in Caldwell County, they used to claim that she killed him with a nail to the temple. That while he was asleep, she just hammered a nail in. But there was nothing in the records that survived of the trial to ever indicate that, and there was nothing in the folklore of the family and the people of Toe River itself to say that. But it's sort of a grim tale because it was set at the background of a new world that people had come to, and in the mountains at that time you had people that still had certain family traditions that were in flux and joining together. The Silvers were of German stock, and many of their neighbors were of Scots and Irish and English background, and so you had a combination of this living in a new land and sort of being transplanted. And a lot of people thought, I believe, at the beginning that they would come to this country, gain their fortune, and eventually go home. But it never happened that way. And in the process of time and people changing and families coming together, many of these old stories were kept alive through people telling them to each other and to children as the years passed. And that's one from my family that used to fill me with fright in a way because it was so bloody, and I could see in my mind that little cabin and hear those screams. And my grandmother that raised me, she said her brother, one of her brothers, told me one time that he and another man were hunting up in that holler where Charlie and Frankie lived, and said all at once it sounded like somebody was just being killed. The screams were just terrible. And so I think of that a lot, but it's a good story, and the song is being passed along, and I'll probably try to pass it on to my children someday.
Hey, great. That was good. Good.
I kept finding myself scooting this way and that, and I was trying to...
That's all right. You can start whenever you're ready. You can sing them and explain them or whatever. Yeah, you can do
Okay, you mean to talk in?
Whatever makes you happy. Yeah.
All right.
Whenever you're ready.
Some of the songs that I learned growing up came from a family that were raised up in Watauga County near Boone. It's up really close to the Ashe County line in a community. There's two communities. One is Meat Camp and one is called Pottertown. And a lot of good stories came out of there because it seemed like for many years that there was some kind of fight or trouble or killings going on just practically every week. But the people that lived up in there kept a lot of traditions going, stories that were handed down. old Uncle Bill Allison used to tell me some of them and sing some of the songs for me. And he'd talk about being a young man up there and being out on the mountains at night. There was a really beautiful mountain. Of course, it's still there, called Long Hope, that's near Pottertown in Meat Camp. And he said he would go hunting, coon hunting a lot when he was a young man. And he would camp out at night and he would listen to the creeks and the branches as they went down the mountainside, and the noise that they made and the sound of the wind in the trees. And he wrote a lot of songs, or several songs himself, about things that he thought about, but he sang a lot of the ballads. And this is just a couple of verses of one that he said that he would sing at night when he would be sort of lonesome, but he would think about his people that had come over from the old country and sailed on their voyages in boats, and the things that they had brought with them. And I guess he wondered about how some of the stories and songs that he knew came down to him, because he realized, without having an extensive education, that these things were very old. And this is, I'll sing a song or two that I learned from this family. They were Allisons and related to the Potters of Watauga County. Cold mountains, they are here around us, and waters trickling down the stream. All in my dreams I thought I was with her, but when I woke it was all a dream. When I awoke and could not find her, all on my bed did weep and mourn. Tears from my eyes fell without number, to think that I was left alone. There were more verses of it, but I can't think of them all right now. I have them written down on the song ballot somewhere. But he said that he would sing that, for instance, at night when he would be looking at the stars that shined up over the mountains. And to me, that's a perfect picture of some of the feelings that I had in growing up when I would hear these songs and think about where they came from and what they meant and the people whose lives they represented. And then he'd turn around and he'd sing a song, something like this, and where he learned it or where it come from, I don't know. But he called it, There Was a Fair Maiden. There was a fair maiden who lived on the plains. She hoped me head cattle through the cold steady rains. She hoped me head cattle for 2 years and up, and would take a drink with me from a cold bitter cup. I taught her my cow trade and the rancher's command, how to use a 6-shooter and the need of her hand. How to use a 6-shooter and never to run, as long as there's a bullet for her load in her gun. Was the late hours of midnight when the Indians they cried. I rose from my warm bed, those redskins to fight. Loud roared the thunder and down poured the rain. In come a stray bullet and dashed out her brains. I mounted my pony, 6 shooters in each hand, saying, "Come all ye gay cowboys, let's take this fair land. Come all ye gay cowboys, let's take their bad lives, for the Indians have murdered my dear darling wife." One thing that song reminds me of, too, is the fact that among most of my people and the people of Uncle Bill Allison and up in Western Carolina, which is true in East Tennessee also, that we almost all have Indian blood long back through the line somewhere. And there used to be a lot of tales about the Indians, and they were told about one woman that went out one day to milk the cow, and she looked down the hill, and the cow was making a strange sound. It wasn't moving. And so instead of going on down to see if it was sick, she went back and got her husband, his brother, and they came back and had her to call the cow, and it made that noise, and they just shot their guns into the cow. And they went down there and pulled the hide back, and they found 2 Indians laying dead there. And they had skinned the cow and was waiting for her to come milk, and they was going to kill her. And a lot of these stories were told when I was little, but they've just about been forgotten now. A lot of times people, when you go out to sing for other people, you want to tell them things that they're really interested in hearing. And a lot of times, myself included, and people like Stanley Hicks, who's dead now, that would tell stories. They'd come out and they'd always be asked to hear Jack in the Bull or the Heifer Hide or Jack in the Giant's New Ground over and over, and they would miss a lot of these wonderful old family tales and little frontier episodes that were talked about quite a lot. The stories about the travelers who would stay all night in a little tavern or a public house, they called them, and they'd suspicion dirty work going on. They'd hide behind the door, and they'd find out that their bed had a trap in it and a spring, and it would drop unsuspecting travelers down into some spikes below, and then the owners would rob them. So a lot of those stories were told, and I think a lot of the people that sang these songs would think back, about their people and their heritage and the tales that were told about them. This is one that David Henry Allison, who would be about 130 or 40 now if he was still living, taught his granddaughter Lizzie Allison, and her brother Rolf Allison taught it to me. There was a knight and a lady bride, and children she had 3. She sent them off to the north country for to learn those grammars, for to learn those grammars. They hadn't been gone but a very short while, scarce 3 months and 1 day, till death spread over that cold land and swept those babes away, and swept those babes away. And when this news was brought to her, she wrung her hands full sore. Alas, alas, my 3 little babes, I never shall see any more. I never shall see any more. If there is a king in heaven, she cried, who wears the golden crown, I pray that he will me reward and send those 3 babes down, and send those 3 babes down. It were about old Christmas time, when the nights were long and cold, her 3 little babes come a-wandering home into their mama's fold, into their mama's fold. She spread a table before them, and on it placed bread and wine. Come eat, come drink, my 3 little babes, come and eat and drink of mine. Come and eat and drink of mine. We cannot eat your bread, Mama, neither can we drink your wine. For yonder stands our Savior dear, and to him we soon must join, and to him we soon must join. She's put a bed in the backmost room, and on it placed clean sheets, and overhead a linen cloth, for to give them better sleep, for to give them better sleep. Take it off, cried the oldest one. Take it off, we cry again. Oh, 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 be to this wicked world so long since time began, so long since time began. Green grass grows o'er our heads, Mama. Cold clay lies at our feet, and the tears you've shed for your sweet little babes, they wet our winding sheet. They wet our winding sheets. How much more time do we have? I'm not sure how far to go.